Now we start muscles, okay? So let's think about muscles, just kind of what you already know about muscles. What do muscles do?
Contract.
They contract, okay? Muscles contract, and then the muscles that we're mainly going to be talking about are going to be the ones that move part of your body, okay? That's the ones we're going to be talking about in this particular chapter, okay? See my lovely drawing of some muscles on there. What bones are there? Humerus, radius, and ulna. And what muscles are there? Biceps and triceps. And why did I just put the biceps and the triceps on there and the particular bones that put there? What's happening in that particular picture? What's happening at that joint? Elbow flexion. Okay? So flexion of the elbow means the decrease in the angle of the joint. And what muscle is doing that action? The biceps muscle, okay? The biceps is contracting. That's why it's got the little bulge, okay? It's contracting. And what bones are moving when the biceps contracts? What bones are the biceps muscle pulling on? The radius and the ulna, okay? And what bone is not moving? The humerus, okay? And so we're going to talk about the structure of skeletal muscle today. We're going to talk about muscle tissue in general, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Talk about the types of cells that are there. We're going to talk about the structure of each of those cells, okay, in general. Then we're going to talk about the structure of a skeletal muscle in general, okay? And kind of like gross anatomy into smaller microscopic anatomy. And then we're going to talk about the structure of skeletal muscle cells and how that's related. You'll see how it's related to what's happening in terms of what the cells do in terms of contraction. Okay? So we're kind of a lot to get through today. Okay? So we start off here with muscle. Muscle tissue accounts for about half of your body mass. Okay? So 200-pound man has about 100 pounds of muscle that's on his body. That includes all three muscle types. Okay? Skeletal muscle, which is the stuff that moves bones. Cardiac muscle, which is found where? In the heart. Okay? And smooth muscle, which is found where? Intestines, hollow organs, blood vessels, right? Kind of all over the place. This particular chapter that we're studying is going to be mainly concerned with skeletal muscle. Okay? We'll talk about all three muscle tissue types today. And then we'll talk about cardiac muscle again when we get to chapter 18 or 19, whatever it is. We talk about the heart, specifically the heart. Okay? Smooth muscle, we probably won't talk about again, okay, specifically, because smooth muscle is kind of found everywhere, okay? It's found in all of your blood vessels. So we'll talk about it when we talk about blood vessels. It's found in the digestive tract. So we'll talk about it when we talk about the digestive tract. And it's found in the urethra and the kidney. We'll talk about it then. Make sense? So smooth muscle is kind of found in all different organs, all over the place, right? So we'll talk about it at different points throughout the semester or throughout the year. All right, but for this chapter, we're mainly concerned with skeletal muscle. Okay? So skeletal muscles, gross anatomy of skeletal muscles, are biceps, triceps, pectoralis, the vastus muscles, the rectus femoris, the biceps femoris, right? The gluteus maximus, those are all skeletal muscles. These muscles are comprised of very long cells that are multinucleated, and they exhibit what's called striations. They're striped. Okay? These muscles are under voluntary conscious control. Most of the time, normally, your biceps doesn't just start contracting. Sometimes it does happen. You get a little muscle spasm. Okay? But most of the time, you have to actually think about it for it to happen. Okay? These muscles contract quickly. They tire easily. Because they contract very quickly, they are powerful. Power is a measurement of a distance traveled in a period of time. Okay? You might think that's velocity. It's actually work done, anyways. Physics getting in the way. But power in terms of muscle is how much force is generated in a period of time. So a very short period of time, muscles contract, they're very powerful. Okay? And because these are voluntary, they require nervous system stimulation. So what does a muscle cell look like? Okay? That's okay. We have these long cells. Okay, they're pretty cylindrical. Okay? And they exhibit some striations. All right, these striations, they're like striped. So it looks something like this. Oh, let's do a little thicker than that. They have alternate patterns of dark and light banding. Okay, so we have this is a dark band, and the area in between is a light band. Okay? That's what the striations look like. The cells have multiple nuclei. These cells are really, really big. Okay? So they exhibit multiple nuclei. So they have nuclei that are on the periphery, on the edge of the cell. Okay? And they have several of them. Because of the size of the cell, multiple nuclei is necessary so that they can make RNA messages, make protein for the whole cell. That makes sense? Right? So, one area is in charge of that nuclei is in charge of one part of the cell, this one's in charge of this one, right? We can kind of compartmentalize. Okay? Also, the multiple nuclei are a result of how these cells are formed. These are really big cells. These cells they are derived from a stem cell in muscle called a satellite cell. And the satellite cells fuse together to form a larger muscle cell. All right, so multiple cells, the nuclei transfer and they stay over. Okay? These cells are not mitotic. In other words, they're not going to undergo mitosis because they have multiple nuclei. Which one is going to be the one that we replicate, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So muscle cells, they do not undergo mitosis. Okay? On the inside of these muscle cells so this muscle cell is also called, another name for it is called a myofiber. Okay? That's synonymous with muscle cell. All right? A muscle fiber. Okay? Along the outside, the muscle cell has a specialized cell membrane. That cell membrane is called the sarcolemma. Okay? Make sense? All right, so sarcolemma is just cell membrane of a skeletal muscle cell. On the inside of these muscle cells are what we call myofilaments. They're like little circles. They're like rods that extend out. Okay? They extend out One of those is called a myofibril. Okay? And on the myofibrils are your bands, the striations. Okay? The striations are made from what we call myofilaments. Okay? So part of this today, I want you to understand the difference between a myofiber, a myofibril, and a myofilament. Do not get those mixed up. I get a lot of students, and I still say it, I'll stumble over my words as well. But students will get mixed up between what a myofiber is, the skeletal muscle, and a myofibra. Okay? Make sure you know the difference. Myofibrils are components within a skeletal muscle cell. Okay? Let's talk about cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle only found in the heart. They are also striated. Okay? The striations in skeletal muscle and in cardiac muscle are actually how the contractions are going to occur. Okay? So the striations are actually going to work, those myofilaments work to actually contract the muscle. Okay? The difference being the structure of the filaments in cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle are different. Although they're striated, they're not structured the same way. That makes sense? Okay? So if they're not structured the same way, what do you think about their function? Let me ask you a different way. Does skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle contract the same way? No, right? Skeletal muscle contracts every second, right? In a normal pattern, okay? It is an involuntary contraction in cardiac muscle, okay? So the structure of skeletal muscle is different because the function is different, right? Or you could say the structure of cardiac muscle is different because the function is different, okay? So striated, yes, they can contract without nervous system stimulation, right? So they can contract on their own, therefore they're involuntary, right? And we'll talk more about this in chapter 18. But let's actually look at the structure of a cardiac muscle cell, okay? These they tend to be uninucleated. What does that mean? One nucleus, okay? They can be branched, meaning that the cell can kind of split into two different parts or have different connections with other cells, okay? And they have unique cellular connections called intercalated discs, okay? So this is what a cell looks like. So if we were going to draw a cell, or a couple cells in this case, all right, and at each end of the connections of the cells, there is these intercalated discs. Okay, and each cell has a nucleus. And then what do these cells have? They have striations, right? So you have some striations that look like this. Make sense? Yes? So these purple things are your intercalated, oh, I like that color though, intercalated discs. Okay? They're branched, they kind of connect out, and they're involuntary. Okay? Questions on general structure of cardiac muscle cells? All right, last is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs, the stomach, urinary bladder, small, large intestine, blood vessels, the ureter, airways, right? Your bronchioles, airways that go into your lungs are made up of smooth muscle. Okay? They're not striated. They are involuntary. Okay? And they are what we call spindle-shaped. Okay? Meaning that they are thinner at the ends than they are in the middle. And most of the time, they are found in sheets of cells. So you will have a cell like this, and they will be attached to other cells nearby in a sheet pattern. All right, something like that with nuclei. Uninucleated, non-striated, involuntary muscle cells, right? And they're in this sheets. Okay? Structure is different. They're non-striated, so how they contract is different. All right, so contraction of cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle use those myofilaments. Contraction of smooth muscle cells does not. All right? Instead, they kind of corkscrew. And so you end up with it goes something like this. Instead of that spindle form, it ends up shortening into this twisted type of cell. Okay, with the nucleus also twisting. Imagine just taking the ends of that cell and twisting it, in this direction, and this one going that direction. Whoop. Right? If you imagine taking an elastic band, and twisting the ends in opposite directions, what happens to the elastic? It contracts, it balls up on itself, and it gets smaller, right? Same thing that's happening here. Similar thing that's happening here. Twisting the ends, and that's the contraction that occurs. Okay, a corkscrew type of contraction. Make sense? Understand? So those are the three types of muscle tissue. Okay, different structure, some structural differences, right? But they still have at least one thing in common. And what's that? At least one thing. They contract. Okay, so here's the muscle pictures. So this is skeletal muscle. You can see you have multiple nuclei. Right? Overall, we have, let's say, draw a line. There's 1, 2. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different cells. There's probably 15, 20 nuclei on that particular, right? And then we have, these are the banding, the striations that are there. Okay? Alternating light and dark banding. Okay? I'm looking around, making sure people see what I'm seeing. Yes? Cool. Cardiac muscle, right? Branching, that's present. You have multiple chains. The cells could be most of them are uninucleated. They can be binucleated. Then you have the branching that occurs. All right, so here we have a cell, and it branches and connects to these other two cells. There's actually no nucleus in this particular cell, right? And then you have that one that goes over there and goes back. This nucleus goes to this one, and so on, right? So this is a cell, and you have it. You can see the banding that's present here, right? But it's not as dark or as pronounced as in the skeletal muscle, right? Okay, and there's also some striations that happen in this direction. See that? So a little bit different in structure. You shook your head no. You don't see that? Okay. Okay. And then we have this, right? These in purple are your intercalated discs. Connections between cells. Those connections between cells are unique. They allow one cell to talk to another so that all of the muscle cells can cooperate. They can work as one single unit. And we want that to happen in our heart, right? We want the whole muscle to contract at once. Make sense? And then finally we have our smooth muscle, right? Our sheet of smooth muscle cells. In here you have a smooth muscle cell, kind of like that one, and this one goes this way, and that one goes that way, right? Each of them have a nucleus, and they're spindle-shaped. Okay? Questions on the three types of muscle tissue? Cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. And like I said, we're going to be concerned with skeletal muscle tissue in this class for this particular chapter. Okay? All right. So, let's talk about the characteristics of all muscle tissue. And we've already talked about one of them. Stop moving. There we go. Okay? We've said all muscle tissue can do what? They can contract. So all muscle tissue has some type of contractility. Okay? It can shorten. Well, the muscle can also lengthen beyond its normal length. Okay? When you stretch a muscle, and I think about the whole muscle organ as it is, okay? It's stretched beyond where it's supposed to. You can feel that, right? That's a property of it. It's what's called extensible. Okay? So extensibility means it can be stretched beyond its normal length. Okay? To a certain degree. Do you want to yank it? Right? So think about an elastic band, rubber band. You pull it, it can be stretched. Yes? Beyond its normal length. But if you do it too much, it'll tear and cause problems. Okay? That same rubber band, when you let go, what's going to happen? It's going to recoil. Okay? And muscles have that ability as well. They have elasticity. They can return back to resting length. Okay? And all of these properties are a property of not only the whole muscle organ, but right down to each muscle cell. Okay? Each muscle cell has the same properties. Okay? Now the last two are what makes muscles unique to a point. It makes them able to respond to stimulus. Okay? Most of the time, our skeletal muscles, they don't just contract on their own. Okay? There has to be something that starts the contraction. Right? And so muscles by themselves can respond to stimuli. They exhibit part of your responsiveness. They are excitable. Okay? Any of you ever gone to physical therapy? Yes? And you ever had the physical therapist said, oh, we're going to put some stimulation on your muscle? What do you do? What do you do? All right, so the patches on their electrodes they put on, and then what happened? They turn the machine on and he tingles, and then he goes, tell me when to stop where it feels okay but not uncomfortable, right? So what is he turning the machine on? What's the tingling? What's the machine doing? How is it exciting the muscles? Sending voltage to the muscles, electrical impulses. And so when he dials it up and is like, oh, let me know when this doesn't, where it feels okay, it's not uncomfortable, right? You can feel it, but it's not uncomfortable. That's an electrical impulse, and he's just increasing the voltage to a certain point. Okay? Increase the voltage, and it makes your muscles kind of starts to respond. And they can kind of contract a little bit, but not too much, because they're kind of beneath that, what we call a threshold level. Okay? So that's what's happening. When your muscles fire, When you contract them, it's in response to an electrical stimulus from the nervous system. Okay? Skeletal muscles. So muscles are excitable. Okay? They can receive and respond to that stimuli. And then lastly, the muscle cell itself is conductive. Okay? What that means is the electrical stimulus can come into one part of the muscle cell, and it will be transmitted through the entire muscle cell. Okay? So that stimulus that the physical therapist does and he amps it up, he's actually putting it into not only your muscle cells, but also the nearby neurons, which are going to fire into that. Okay? So the muscles can kind of react to this. All right? And that makes them what we call conductive. Okay? Neurons, and you'll see the next unit, neurons are also excitable and conductive. Okay? So those are 5 characteristics of muscle tissue. Okay? So what do muscles do then? What do they do generally? What do they do? They contract. Okay. So their contraction helps to do what for the body? What functions do muscles play by their contraction or relaxation? What functions do they do for the body? What? Movement. There's one. Okay? So movement. So that I can walk and talk and, draw things. Okay? Movement. They also help me maintain posture. So even though I'm standing still, I'm not necessarily moving, muscles are contracting, right, in order to allow me to stand upright, right? Back straight, neck up. Okay? They also stabilize joints, all right, on either side. They generate heat. Okay? Heat generation. In a simple form, muscle contraction is just transferring energy from one form to another. Think about what muscle contraction does. It utilizes ATP, which is a chemical form of energy, storage, potential energy, and transfers that, breaks ATP down, does into a mechanical energy contraction. Okay? Going back to Bio 101, anytime there's a transfer of energy, there is some loss to the environment. Okay? We could compare that to your car engine. What's the potential energy you put into the car? Yes. Right? Fuel. Okay? What's the mechanical energy? Right? Driving around. Tomorrow my daughter is going to get her driving license. Whew. Okay. So, driving around, right? Some of that potential energy that's in the fuel is lost to heat. Where does it go? After you run the car for a little bit, what happens to the engine? It gets warm, right? It helps heat the car. Yes? All of that's the energy that's lost to the environment in terms of heat. Okay? So, in a way, that's a comparison. Okay? Muscles protect organs. They form valves. They control pupil size. Your lovely, pretty brown eyes, blue eyes, hazel eyes, green, yellow, 2 different colors like Max Scherzer, whatever you want to call. Okay? The pupils dilate in order to protect your retina from being damaged from light that's too bright. And then finally, they regulate elimination of materials. Okay? So urination and defecation are actually, storage of those materials until ready to be released, and then is one set of muscles, and then release of those materials is another set of muscles. Okay? And we'll talk about that when we talk about those particular units. Questions? So some functions of muscles. All right. So functions of muscles. Let's talk about the structure, the gross anatomical structure of muscles, of a muscle. Let's talk about like the biceps muscle. Okay? So the bicep muscle is attached to, let's call this, looks like, there we go, that's not too bad. It's not too bad, right? It sits on top of the humerus right here, right? So we have some connective tissue, and then we have the muscle itself. Okay? Right? Right? So if we take that muscle, how muscles are connected to a bone is by some type of connective tissue. Right? But what part of muscle is doing the contraction? The muscle fiber, the cell, right? So if each cell is doing the contraction, there has to be a way for each cell to be connected to what it's going to move. Does that make sense? Yes? So these connective tissue coverings of muscle are how that connection is applied. Okay, so eventually we have to get back to and connect to, say, the tendon. All right? And each muscle is going to be connected in this way. So we have this, here's the muscle, and on the outside of the muscle, say this is the whole muscle itself. Okay? That outside, that layer of connective tissue is going to be called the epimysium. So the epimysium is a connective tissue layering that covers the entire muscle itself along the outside. All right, so something like that. Right? That pink part is the inside of the muscle. That make sense? Yes? Okay. When I say, if I cut the muscle in half, right down the middle, and I opened it up, I'm looking now down the muscle. Okay? If I look, there's actually small compartments and sections within each muscle. Okay? And they look something like that. Whoops. Like this. Try to do this in different colors so that you can kind of make sense of it. Okay? And then one of those is we're going to look at one of them. Okay? Okay, each one of these, let's say this whole thing, one of those is called a fascicle. Okay? So the different parts. So in here we have 1, 2, 3, you get the idea. Right? Multiple fascicles that are present inside the whole muscle. Okay? And then on the outside of that fascicle, the blue, this blue connective tissue lining is called the perimysium. Just giving it a little outline here. Okay? And inside the perimysium are individual muscle cells. So this whole thing right? So each one of those is a fascicle. Like this whole thing would be a fascicle as well. Okay? I'm looking at one fascicle. So now on the inside of this is going to be individual muscle cells. Okay, so this is an individual muscle cell. This is a myofiber. Okay, and we could actually, see each one of these is a myofiber. Okay, the myofibers are covered by another, the most internal connective tissue lining, which is, so it covers all of this. And covers is kind of in between. You okay? I'm worried about people. Guys, see this? Yes, this makes sense? Yes? Yes? This is called the endomysium. And then on the inside of that muscle cell would be you would have your myofibrils in there. Okay? So I try to do it stepwise, kind of where things go. Does that make sense? You're looking at it like, I don't know. Yes?
Kind of squint that.
Okay. Yes? All right. So now when we go to this other picture, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. I try to do it so we kind of like move from one level down together. All right, so on the outside, we have the epimysium covers the entire muscle, and it is continuous with the tendon or the connection to the bone. All right, inside, within the epimysium the epimysium bundles a bunch of these fascicles together. All right, so each one of these is a fascicle. Okay? So these are fascicles. And the fascicles are bounded on the outside by the perimysium. All right, wraps a fascicle. And then within the fascicle are your muscle cells. This is a muscle cell. Okay? That's a muscle fiber, a muscle cell, and that is where the endomysium is found. All right, between individual muscle fibers. And then within the muscle fiber are each one of these are your myofibril. Okay? Structure. Okay? And now all of the subsequent connective tissues, we start, so on the inside in the endomysium connects to the perimysium connects to the epimysium, which connects to the tendon. So somewhere there's always that. So this picture up here shows that. We actually have all three, epi, peri, and endo, right? Endo, eventually to peri, to epi. Kind of all connected. There's a connection somewhere. If a skeletal muscle cell is going to contract, It needs to have something to pull on, and so it connects to these connective tissues, which eventually get out to the tendon somewhere. That make sense? Nod with me now. Yes, good. Hopefully. Questions? Okay. All right. So now, the muscle, in a gross anatomical sense, connects to a bone or to skin. Okay? It has to connect somewhere, has to have at least two connections. Okay? One, which is its anchor point, called the origin. Okay? And then the other, which is what it's going to pull on, called the insertion. Okay? So when we do flexion of the elbow, we bend our elbow, what bone is not moving? The humerus is not moving, and what is actually up over the humerus? The scapula and part of the clavicle, right? So the scapula and the humerus are your origin for the biceps muscle. What bones are moving? The radius and the ulna, okay? Those bones are moving. So the insertion is at least on one of them, right? So it inserts and moves, let's say it moves the radius, right? But the ulna goes with it. Okay? You will not be asked or required to know all of the origins and insertions of the muscles, whether in this class or in lab. Okay? It will benefit you greatly in preparation for your lab exam for muscles if you can understand where the muscle is going to connect to. Okay, so if we're talking about the quadriceps muscle, right, there's 4 muscles in there. Let's use one of them, the rectus femoris. It connects and inserts on the tibia. Is it going to move the femur? No. Okay, it actually does this because of where it connects. Make sense? It has some movement, some added point in like hip flexion, like moving the knee up. Okay, but it is mostly knee extension. Okay, you won't be asked to identify the origins and insertions. Understanding the bones will help you identify the actions of the muscles, which you will be responsible for. Does that make sense? Okay, so you don't have to learn them, but understand if you understand where they're contacting, you can at least start to make a guess about what they do. Okay? Now the attachments can be direct or indirect. Most of them are indirect attachments, either through a tendon or what we call a sheet-like attachment called an aponeurosis. In your forehead, you have 2 pieces of a muscle, right, which allows you to move your eyebrows separately from one another. Okay? If anyone cannot do that, can you not do that? Raise one eyebrow, turn the other. Yeah. So, you have actually 2 parts to this muscle. This is the frontalis muscle, which inserts. What does it move? The action moves what? Your eyebrows. So where do you think they insert on? The skin of your eyebrows, right? That's what the insertion is. Where is the origin? Close. It's actually up here on the parietal bone. Okay? So there's a sheet-like attachment to, yeah, you could do it that way, right? So there's a sheet-like attachment on the top of your head. Okay? Do you have to hold your head to do it? Or can you feel it? You can feel it. Okay? And that same attachment, the same aponeurosis, also is for the back muscle, back of your head, called the occipitalis. Okay? Really, this is like this one big muscle, and you have a part back here and a part right there. And it attaches to your skull so that you can move your scalp. And if you really think about it, you can kind of move that part and wiggle your ears. I have to really think about it to do it. Okay? Questions on attachments of muscles? No? Good. All right. So now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. As if all of that wasn't enough. Let's talk about the anatomy, the microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle fibers. So we already I showed you a little part of it. We went over a little part of it. We talked about long cylinder cell, nuclei on the periphery. Okay? I'm going to talk about a couple other things that are involved. And the sarcolemma. Okay, so let's draw our muscle cell. Okay? We have this long cylindrical cell, cylinder. Inside there we have numerous, what are these called? Myofibrils. Good. Right? Numerous myofibrils. And we'll have one that extends out like that. Oh, actually, you know what? I don't want to do it like that. Let's erase that one. We'll have one that extends out like that, but it's going to be, whoops, nope. Undo, and do this like that. We'll have one that extends out like this, hollow. Okay? So numerous myofibrils inside the myofiber. What do we know about what is this thing out here called in black? The membrane, what's it called? Close. Sarcolemma is the membrane. Okay? The endomysium is outside of the sarcolemma. Okay? I'm glad that actually came up because I want to make sure of that. Outside of the muscle fiber, outside of the sarcolemma, is the endomysium. Okay, so the sarcolemma. Now, the sarcolemma, so we also have these things. What else do we have? What is present at regular patterns along the not only the myofiber, the striations, right? So the striations occur at regular patterns along the entire muscle cell, right? And it actually comes from the striations that are found on the myofibrils. Okay, they kind of all line up. So when you see it, it looks like this, right? I'm not doing the best drawing job today. Now, a couple other things. There are some modified structures that are present. Okay? One of them is called a T-tubule. All right? So a T-tubule occurs at regular intervals along the sarcolemma. And at certain points along the sarcolemma, there are breaks. It almost looks like there are like little tunnels. And the sarcolemma actually invaginates into and empties into the cell. Okay? And it happens at normal intervals. And it will actually extend mostly all the way through, but it's underneath. Okay, so it'll extend all the way through. So then imagine there's one here and it kind of extends down, all the way down into the deep parts of the cell. And there's another one here, it goes down this way, like that. And this one goes down there. So that it eventually wraps around all of the myofibrils that are found inside this particular myofiber, inside this muscle cell. Okay? Yes? Another modified structure is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. What does that sound like? endoplasmic reticulum. Okay? The sarcoplasmic reticulum is a specialized endoplasmic reticulum, and its job is to store calcium. Okay? And the sarcoplasmic reticulum kind of overlays all of these things. All right, kind of overlays. And then it runs into this endpoint. There's another endpoint, overlays this, and it runs another endpoint right there. Right, and there would be another one right there, another one there, and it kind of connects. Where did I draw each of these endpoints? Over striations, right? And where do the endpoints go? Where do the endpoints stop? At a T-tubule. Okay? So now each point you have these two things, these endpoints are called terminal cisternae. Okay? They're the endpoints. They're a block of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? And so you'll notice you actually have two terminal cisternae that are adjacent to a T-tubule or transverse tubule. Every time. Right? Yes? That group, that pattern of three, right, of these three things is called a triad. 2 plus 1, last time I checked, my math, non-common core, is 3. Triad, 3. 2 terminal cisternae and a transverse tubule. And it happens at regular intervals. Okay? Okay? Questions on that? Let's see what it looks like on the picture that was done much better than mine. Okay? So here is a myofiber with the sarcolemma pulled back. The endomycelium would be on the outside of the sarcolemma. The sarcolemma has a number of little holes. Okay, these little holes right here. Those are the invaginations of the transverse, the T-tubules, which you see here in green. See that? Yes? Okay? And then on either side of the T-tubule is a terminal cisternae of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, giving you your triad. Okay? And if you notice, they line up over the bands. Dark bands, light bands, dark bands, light bands. Okay? It's going to be very important. Okay, so those regular intervals are based off of the banding pattern of the myofibril within the myofiber. Okay? And you can see here the terminal the sarcoplasmic reticulum gets all the way down onto all of these, and the T-tubules would also do the same thing. Right? The T-tubules would go down into the depths of the deep parts of the myofibrils. Okay? Questions? Here's your relationship of T-tubule and terminal cisternae. All right? Giving you your triad. Triad is this thing, right? Sarcoplasmic reticulum stores calcium. And that's important so now what's going to end up happening, I'm going to give you a preview of what we're going to be talking about, is that the electrical impulses that are going to start on the membrane, okay, are going to be transferred down the membrane. Then they're going to get into one of these T-tubules. So the T-tubule is going to come down, it's going to go into this T-tubule, right, and then be transmitted all the way through the T-tubule. The T-tubule is attached to each terminal cisternae. Well, in those terminal cisternae are proteins that are sensitive to a change in electrical potential. The electrical charge changes and causes the terminal cisternae to release calcium. And then calcium is important and used for contraction. Okay, it's how we connect the electrical impulse, excitation, to the contraction. So we call excitation-contraction coupling. Okay? And we'll talk about that on New Wednesday of next week. Now, within the myofibrils are myofilaments. Right? The myofilaments are actin and myosin. We'll talk about those. The unit of the myofilaments, right, and how they're arranged is called the sarcomere. The sarcomere is the functional unit of contraction. Okay? It goes from this one to that one, and what's going to end up happening is these are going to be pulled into one another as they slide over, making the sarcomere shorten. Okay? We'll talk about that process next week. Okay? For now, that's where we need to stop for now. Okay? Questions? It's a lot of information, right?